kill what I do for fun.
I used to have some hobbies.
No, I haven't heard anything back from Goki's. I'll give him a call again. See. You know.
Howdy. How about you? Yeah? Oh, sure.
Tell you, Matt.
In the summer, I bet that's popular.
Go on, Chuck.
Yeah.
I'm here. Surviving. How much else can do, right? Ah, I'd never do that. Realize doesn't do me any good.
How does it compare with competition across the river?
Yeah.
Who's got those?
Well, he's actually bought an old bass boat
I know,
for themselves.
but I mean, it's just.
Really?
Yeah. And I just pulled the jet ski out of water, out of storage. Didn't change the oil or anything yet. Just.
My son works for the state of Minnesota, and I can't believe the benefits that they have. He's too young and stupid. How good he's got. But our plan at the school district, I've got a $5,000 per individual.
Parents live up in Roseau. Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife's mom. And
Good, how are you?
Oh man.
All right.
They let you in?
Good talking to you.
Jeez. What did you do to get out?
Oh man, it's so nice to start seeing these, isn't it?
Far enough away from each other now.
Good.
Go. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Tuesday, May 18th, 2021 meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. I entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. So moved.
Second?
I have a motion by Paulson, seconded by McDougal to approve the meeting agenda. All in favor, say aye. Oh, excuse me. Roll call vote. Duran,
Yep.
Paulson,
Yep.
McDougal,
Yep.
Thompson, yes. I entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved?
Second.
Okay, a motion by McDougal, seconded by Paulson to approve the consent agenda. Paulson,
Aye.
Duran,
Yes.
McDougal,
Yes.
Thompson, yes. Customers to be heard?
That I'm aware of.
Seeing none. Old business?
Yes, I do have one item to bring up under old business. I did provide a memo from Attorney John Shockley to the commission and the council or commission liaisons as well to discuss. We had a request for a donation program a few months back at one of our previous meetings, and John did some due diligence in discussions with John Bolger and City Manager Molly as well. And he has provided a memo to MPS on if it is allowable to have a donation program for COVID or any type of third-party funding as well too. So really, John has kind of spelled everything out. It is permissible to have a donation program. There's some technical items as well that we are able to handle it within our bill if we wanted to, if a customer would like to have something put on their bill, or they can do a one-time donation as well. John does note that there are several other programs already out there, and and then of course there are also some questions or concerns on how does this get set up. So from that, I guess I'll let you guys discuss it in further and see where you want to go. At this point in time, I think there's a lot of technical things or technical items that need to be handled. So I think at the end of this, if there's something that wants to be done, I think a working group would be advisable to have and kind of work through the details and bring it back to the commission at a later date.
Anybody like to speak to this question or this issue?
I think it's a great idea. I'm very appreciative that that Travis, you were able to reach both attorneys and Dan and get this going. Yeah, I'm excited about it. Good work.
John, do you want to bring anything up? Any concerns within your memo?
Thank you, members of the Morehead Public Service Commission. As set forth in my memo, it is legally permissible to set up this type of donation program. There's a couple significant hurdles. They're not impossible to jump over, but they do add cost and time in the administration of such a program. So under Minnesota law, political subdivisions can't gift money to people. And so we'd have to use a third-party conduit. So MPS would collect the fee. It would go to a third-party entity, and the third-party entity would make the decisions and evaluate the criteria for who should or should not get the relief. And so I guess I do have some concerns about the administrative cost of that. Also, the other concern is that as the board is aware, you can't give out utility customer information under Minnesota law as a utility. And so customers that would like to relief from the program would need to sign some sort of waiver. And I don't know if customers that are in that position would necessarily want to, give something to the public entity that they're requesting to be part of that program. We can certainly set it up. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware going into it that there could be some significant costs in just setting it up. Typically, third parties charge a fee to administer a program. So the funds that people would be earmarking for donations or offsetting these costs, some of it would go to administration to a third party. Can certainly answer any questions, but I guess my biggest concern was just making sure that the board understood that you could be spending a lot of the funds on administration rather than actual substantively giving relief to people.
Yeah, and another point too is, the question we don't know is how much money are we going to be receiving in from other residents in Moorhead. One of the key factors I think we would want to have is that the money stays in Moorhead, so it's only available to Moorhead residents or Moorhead customers. Secondly, I think you also want to consider, there's already a lot of programs out there, like I initially said as well. You might want to look at it from a standpoint of, there's already a LIHEAP or heating assistance plan. There's a water assistance plan that's coming out, but we don't know how long that program's going to be available as well. And then there's, of course, the city services portion of the bill as well. And that probably is the key factor of what we should be looking at for this program is providing relief for the city services portion, because there is no programs out there currently for that. So this might be a collaboration between the city of Moorhead and MPS to come up with a program that works for all the utilities that are on the bill.
Please.
Mr. Shockley, what type of an entity are you referring to as far as a third-party administrator? Is this are these private companies, or these nonprofits, or is there something that could be set up as a nonprofit with folks that are either nominated or appointed or volunteer for a position to assist in figuring out how to administer the funds?
So in the research that I performed, a number of the cities that had implemented this program had used a nonprofit third party to implement it. Typically, those types of nonprofits are familiar with evaluating the needs of people applying for the program. Typically, you wouldn't have sufficient funds to pay for everybody's past due account, so they have to determine on the merits who should get the assistance. So I would expect that it would be a nonprofit. As to forming a brand new entity, you could certainly form a new entity, but once again, that's going to add an additional, there's cost to forming a nonprofit, and there's time with filing the nonprofit incorporation documents, filing the required documents with the Internal Revenue Service. So yes, I'll give the typical engineering question or answer is that yes, there's a solution to it, but how much money do you want to spend on the administration?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Shockley. I think that answers my question, and I think that's the overarching question is how much money is going to be coming in, and without knowing that, it's hard to make a determination on if this is a value return on or return on ROI. I guess you could say something along those lines. I guess I'm maybe a little bit interested to hear Councilmember Hendrickson's perspective from the Morehead City Council, because I do think this would be something we would do in conjunction with the Morehead City Council. And certainly, I don't know if there's been any discussions at the council level or if this is the first time this is being previewed. Yeah,
the request came from a customer to be heard a few meetings ago, and this is the first time we're bringing it back. John provided this probably after our last meeting that we had, so this is the first time it's being discussed. Again, we did talk with City Manager Molly and the mayor and Chris Thompson and myself last week, just coming up with a game plan on how to present this. So initially, since it came from a customer at the MPS commission meeting, we're going to talk about it here tonight first, and then we'll go from there on that. I would suspect it'd be a couple commissioners and a couple council members that would look into this as a working group.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And Madam Chair, I'm all in favor for this. I think it's a great idea, and it certainly could be very advantageous if we saw the revenue come in from the donations. So yeah, of course, I'm supportive of continuing to investigate this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with that. In theory, I think it's a great plan or program to possibly look at, but I think we do need to figure out more, get more information on it. And could this be a huge Pandora's box later on down the road for us? Is that possibility?
Without, I mean, if you had sufficient revenue coming in and the program worked really well, it could be very successful. But if, you have approximately 13,000 accounts, if everybody just gave $1, I don't know if, you're going to be spending quite a bit on administration, and then how much is actually going to get back to the customers, given the size of your accounts payable. We could set it up so that, the city and MPS wouldn't have any liability. You can make the program work from a legal perspective. It just, it's a really tough question for me to answer because I don't know what revenue would be produced. You might have some customer accounts that give 0 and never give any, and then you might have a few that give quite a bit every month. So it's really hard to predict, and and perhaps Travis has a better idea of what that amount would be, but it's just very, very difficult for me to answer.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is just because if there's already entities out there that would do this, would it just be easier for us to facilitate information to them on where they can donate that way as opposed to running it through MPS? As a possibility.
Yep, and Mark did reach out to, I think, West Central and Lakes and Prairie. Administration costs could be between 0 and 20% is what we got from those two entities. It really depends on the dollars of funds that we're providing to the program. My guess would be, again, we should be using a third party like West Central or Lakes and Prairie to administer this because it takes all the work out of it. I mean, you don't have to, reinvent the wheel, basically. They're going to have programs, they've got qualifications and items like that already set up. Again, there's some things that we'll have to look at internally on if we want to change a few of those requirements. But again, that'd be part of the working group that would have to set it up.
Just need to look more into it.
Mr. Hendrickson, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just to address Mr. Paulson's question, formally we haven't been introduced to this, but informally I think every council member is aware of what's going on. And second thing is that, yeah, I'm all for this too. Let's put the working group together. Let's just explore the possibilities we have with this. There's going to be administrative costs, I know, but I still think it's worth the work to look at the opportunity. So.
Any other comments? I believe we need to make a motion to form the work group.
That's what you want to do, yes.
Okay.
Formally, I think, do it as well.
You can do it informally. That's my gut. My gut says that. So any other comments about this? I'd entertain a motion if it's the will of the board or the commission, excuse me, to form a working group and allow or direct Travis to create the working group as a liaison with the city. Does that work for you? Okay.
I'll move to make that motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I'll second.
And I think it's rather informal, so we'll just go with the regular A or nay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Travis, for doing that. Moving on to reports, City Council.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a couple items here. Last council meeting, we discussed the 2021st railroad grade separation project, and we're wondering if we should extend the hours to get done sooner. And right now, it hasn't been sent to the public for their input, and we're waiting for that feedback. So once we do get that feedback, we'll make a decision on if we should extend the hours to get the project done. Because we could push the project all the way to May of 2022 or have it done by November. So, and by November, everything has to be perfect. So, good news, the Moorhead Fargo Community Theater lease space we leave space here at the UMCOM, so Moorhead Fargo Community Theater is coming back to, or not coming back, but coming to the UMCOM. So I notice I said Moorhead Fargo since we're housing it now. We had a vibrant discussion about aerial spraying for mosquitoes, and that's still an ongoing topic. We did sign, I think it's called a retainer, to keep the aerial spraying in our toolbox in case we need to use it, so that's an ongoing discussion. And we appointed a Ward 2 Council member, Heather Netzmeyer, to the open seat by that Mayor Carlson left when she took over as mayor for Mayor Judd. So that's all I have. Lori, do you have anything else?
Nothing else for me. Thank you.
That's all I have.
Any Moorhead Public Service Commission reports?
This is Heidi. I'm sorry, my internet is off and on, so I'm calling in from my phone. I didn't necessarily have a report. I just wanted to bring something to the commission's attention, as well as staff. I got an article that was emailed to me last week about Williston, North Dakota being the first utility company, or the third utility company in the nation to start accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment for utilities. So I just wanted to bring that to staff's attention, and maybe we should be keeping an eye on that, and seeing what maybe we can do, you know, keeping it as a possible tool, I guess. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, moving on to the general manager's report. Travis.
Sure. Just a couple items in here. We do have our first quarter 2021 strategic plan update. So again, we got 5 strategic directions: reliable, efficient, and economical services, being financially strong, retaining qualified, competent staff, and being a regional leader. Along with that, innovation as well. So there's some comments on items that have gone over the first quarter of 2021. Some of those have been ongoing, of course, and will continue on past the first quarter. So just some brief updates on what was going on. As well, we have some dashboards on how the first quarter was going. And then thirdly, we have our lovely monthly update on COVID-19 past due balances. I'm going to have Mark Moylan come on up, and I'll let him speak to the status of that. On April 20th, we did start doing disconnections, and overall, we're finishing that up for the first month actually today, if I remember right. So I'll let Mark speak to the rest of it, but so far it seems to be going fairly well.
Thank you, Travis. Mark Moylan, and Controller. As Travis indicated, we did start doing the normal collection processes. They resumed on April 20th. We've now gone through all 10 billing cycles. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of the staff and dispatchers over at the dispatch center, as well as those that did a couple of after-hours turn-ons during this period, just to keep the process moving. Throughout the process, unfortunately, we had to disconnect or turn off power to about 420 accounts that did not respond to the letters that were sent out, or the automated phone call reminders, or the personal phone call reminders. Of those that were disconnected, we still have 89 that are still disconnected, so either they were abandoned, the tenants have moved out and they don't realize they don't have power, or the landlords are just not paying the utility bills while they're vacant. So we expect to try and finish resolving those over the next month or so. As of today, you know, in this write-up here, which was generated on May 11, we had a large number of accounts enter into payment plan agreements. We were at 354 with a total accumulated balance of just under 700,000. As of today, now we are up to 470 accounts that have entered into those payment plan agreements, which is basically deferring their current balance over the next 2 years. And the total dollar that we've converted is just under $900,000. So it's been going really well, and again, big kudos to staff with working with the customers to get them into either payment plan agreements or to get their electric and water paid to keep their service on, as well as all of the additional data entry that was required to get these agreements entered into our system, which was an entirely new process. So all in all, it's gone very well. And again, we've gone through our first cycle, and we're just interested to see now how it goes going forward as the 24-month increments start getting added to the monthly utility bills, and whether the payments will continue on those utility bills plus the deferrals. With that, I'll open to any questions.
Was this right around the place where you were expecting to come in, or are you?
It's actually, I thought there'd be more in terms of dollars that would have been converted. I expected it to exceed $1 million. So, I mean, we're within 100,000 of that. But we, surprisingly, as I looked at the statistics today of the 420 accounts or so that were disconnected, if you subtract out the about 100 that are still open, and the 144 that did PPAs, you know, we had about 150 or so that actually just made payments, got themselves current, and now are out of the disconnection process for another 60 days. So it was hard to know where we were going to end up, but I expected a large number converted to payment plan agreements, and now the next step will be tracking those as they roll off over the next 2 years.
Mark, roughly half of the past due balances were converted to payment plans, correct?
I would say roughly that. It's very hard to say because when we were putting some of these statistics together a couple months ago, you know, there might have been 1,400 accounts that had the equivalent of 3 or more months past due, but they may have been making payments sufficient to cover at least the electric and water portions. Now that we've started disconnecting electric and water, they may have been fine, but we did see a significant reduction, at least the amount of overall that's past due 3 months or more. And I expect to see it continue to drop over the next few months as we resolve the vacancies, and you know, now we'll have more hands-on with accounts that do go past due.
Has that been a hardship for the customer service representatives?
I will say no. I think it's gone actually fairly well, because in this case, we are giving them an option that costs the customer nothing out of their pockets. They're just agreeing to do something starting next month, which is to take their balance and defer it. So, you know, unfortunately, we did have to disconnect the service to initiate a conversation or get things started, but, you know, most either willingly paid, not a whole lot of feedback, or they entered into the payment plan agreements, which, again, they recognize that they're going to have to start making payments next month going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last item that is on, or actually 2 items. Dennis did provide a little bit of an update on the community solar garden credits for 2020, and that's also included on there. So any customer that had a solar panel at our community solar garden got some type of a credit, somewhere in that $30 to $40 range. So other than that, again, state legislative updates are included in the packet as well, from both Minnesota Municipal Utility Agency and Missouri River Energy Services as well. That's all I have.
Thank you. 8D.
Sure.
Conservation Improvement Program.
Sure, I'll have Dennis come up and speak to this. This is the update on what we did in 2020 for our Conservation Improvement Program, and then what the plan is for 2021. And I will say that there are some legislative things going on now with the SIP plan. I don't know where it's going to land, but there could be some adjustments as we move forward with that. So from that, Dennis, I'll let you go.
Good evening. Dennis Eisenbrown, Energy Services Manager. 2020, we met our state mandate for the SIP program, which is a state mandated program, stands for a Conservation Improvement Program. And the goal is to try to reduce our energy usage by 1.5%. It doesn't sound like a small amount. I mean, it sounds like a small amount, but it's actually very, very difficult to achieve. Anyway, and I don't think we've ever actually met the goal that we've set. But the important thing is that it's a goal, it's not a requirement. but we have always met, as we did last year, the spending requirement. And that also includes what we spend on credits for interruptible load management, percentages of staff time are allocated to these costs, and that's where these numbers come from. So we did meet our state spending requirements, so that's good. The one program that always, I think really just shines for us is we call the Affordable Housing Weatherization Program. I have different names for it, so I gets mixed up there. And this is where we work directly with West Central Community Actions, and then they identify customers that could benefit by having some older appliances replaced by more energy efficient appliances. So we provide that, and that's part of a state requirement also, but it's also just a really good program because it helps these people get appliances that work so they're not having to pay for repairs, and it also fundamentally brings down their energy costs, which is the whole point of the program. So then we've always met that program, the requirements for the expenditure on that easily every year. That's always been a really good, strong point for us. So, and what we're trying to work on next year is to work with Missouri River Energy Services that provides many of the rebates, because a lot of the costs in this number reflect what is paid out in rebates, but those are not hard costs from us. They're paid actually by Missouri River Energy Services. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to do what we call walkthroughs with customers, where we will go to a customer site and try to help identify, lighting opportunities, compressors, things of that nature. But because of COVID, we virtually had zero chances to do that last year. But that's probably one of our strongest ways to get into the customer sites and to help identify more significant goals. And hopefully now with things maybe opening up a little bit more, we'll be able to do that more. So that and continuing, excuse me, to push the rebate program. This is both for commercial and residential customers. It's gone very well in that regard. So kind of the same thing, but we're just hoping that COVID will take less of a bite out of it and let us do our job a little bit better.
Questions for Dennis? I always think it's odd that we celebrate selling less electricity.
I kind of joke with people. I said that one of the odd things about my job is it's measured by how much of our product we don't sell and how much money I give away. It's an odd business plan, but it is what it is. But the bottom line is, what makes sense out of that is the whole point of it is that from the power supply point of view, it delays building the next power plant, which is hugely beneficial. So that's actually what makes sense. But yeah, sell less, give money away. Who knew?
I think we're okay here. Any questions? Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
We need a motion to approve to accept the report.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by McDougall, seconded by Paulson, to accept the report on the 2020 Conservation Improvement Program. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 10, approve the updated reserved capacity agreement.
Sure, I'll start with this, and I'll have Matt Marks come up, our project engineer. This agreement is tied to the Centennial Generating Station. That was very useful during the rolling blackout that we had back in March. What's going on with this is that they're going to be extending the length of the agreement to 2052. I think 2029 was the end of the original agreement. So they're going to give some more life to that. So I'll let Matt speak to the rest of this.
Well, Matt Marks, project engineer. So yes, this is in reference to the Centennial Generating Station, where we have 5 diesel generators that generate about 10 megawatts, originally commissioned back in 2011. So back at that time, MPS entered into an agreement with Missouri River Energy, where they would pay for 2/3 of the cost of that generating station, which is part of what enabled us to build that in the first place. And then the other part of that is that we do receive a credit on our bill for that generation, and Missouri River can then request us to turn on the generators when they have need of it on the larger grid. Since the commissioning of this generating plant, other than the required quarterly tests of the generators and the annual urge test that demonstrates that we can provide that capacity, the first time we were called to run the generators was February during the rolling blackouts. The first agreement expired in 2018. It was then extended to 2029, and then this new agreement being brought tonight will extend that to 2052. It also increases the amount of that credit that we see on our bill for Missouri River. There are some additional requirements on MPS's side for our response time for turning the generators on, and notification to Missouri River of when, if at all, those generators become unavailable for them to call on. At this time, there shouldn't be a huge difference in what we have to provide them. The notice that they're going to continue giving us at this time is still gives us plenty of time to call in the necessary personnel and get the generators turned on. But if at any time in the future it becomes cost prohibitive or too difficult for any of these requirements that we're unable to meet, we are able to exit the agreement. I guess the major potential example would be if the generators age out. We'd be able to exit the agreement and then kind of move on from there. So for now, we have the potential of another 30 plus years of being in this agreement and getting the benefits from it. But with the option to back out if it becomes a problem or becomes an additional cost to us. So, any questions on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering what the credit increase was compared to the last agreement, and how does that work? So the energy we produce while the power generation station is active, we get credit back to Warren Public Service, correct?
Yeah, so it's credited back on the bill. I don't have the exact numbers in front, and it's not a very straightforward calculation, but it's for each kilowatt hour that is generated, there's a certain number of cents that are added on there. That rate has increased, and then there's also if we were to generate over a certain number of megawatts in a month, which again has not been very common so far, but after a certain level, then there's an additional rate that would be applied to us. That is a new feature of this updated agreement.
We have it's just to have it there. It's a reserve capacity. So this, again, we want to use other sources first before this one is necessary, similar to back in February. So we get paid whether it's on or it's just sitting there on a monthly basis. And I'd like to say, I don't remember what the dollar.
I can't think of it off the top of my head.
So,
I'm sorry.
But yeah, we just get a credit, or we get a payment on a monthly basis to have that available. So that's basically how that 2/3 was part of the initial construction of that project. So this will extend that out and actually increase it from 2/3 to a higher amount.
Okay, understood. And then just one last quick question. So if we were to exit the agreement, is the infrastructure retained under Morehead Public Service?
Yep, yeah. It basically, I think what happens is we can actually exit per generator. So if a generator becomes no longer viable or we can't repair it for some reason, we can exit just one generator at a time and keep the other ones available. But yes, the facility itself and the equipment, we retain that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, entertain a motion to approve the agreement.
I'll make a motion to approve the new agreement.
Second?
We have a motion by Paulson, seconded by McDougall to approve the updated reserve capacity agreement. Roll call vote. Duran?
Yes?
Paulson?
Yes?
McDougall?
Yes.
Thompson, yes. Item number 11, approve the 2020 audited financial statements.
I'll start with this. I'll have Mark Moylan come up and Brian Stavanger from Eide Bailey. Brian is our auditor for the 2020 financial statement. So, Mark, if you want to start, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Travis. This is a good time of the year. We present our annual audit, as it has for the past many, many years. It's been successful. Moorhead Public Service received a clean audit. Field work started in early March. Was completed by John Hagan and his team on site. On-site this year actually was remote, but required a lot of sending stuff back and forth through their secure portal, a lot of screenshotting and things. So it was a little bit of a modification from prior years, but nothing that we couldn't manage. And then Brian oversaw the audit as the audit senior for Eide Bailey. And at this time, I'd like to present, I want to thank Katie and Jerry for all the hard work they did as well, preparing the information, gathering the information, getting it to the auditors in a timely manner. I'm pretty sure Brian can attest from his team that, yes, everything was received in a timely manner as requested. And so at this time, I'd like to present Brian Stavanger, who will present the formal audit, as well as present you with the executive summary.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me. Brian Stavanger, as you already heard. I'm a partner with Eide Bailey, been with Eide Bailey for 20 years. Worked with Moorhead Public Service many, many years ago, probably about 2015, 2016. We did a partner rotation, had another gentleman overseeing the audit in my position. And then last year, did another partner rotation. I came back on, presented virtually last year. Probably not as much interaction as I'm hoping to get this year. But thank you for having me. So what I'll do is I'll walk you through the executive summary. That's a very high-level summarized version of the full audited financial statements. Those are prepared by your staff. We audit them, and then we present this executive summary. Many, many years ago, found it to be very valuable to take that high-level approach, also add in up to 10 years worth of comparative information. So I will walk you through that. One thing to note as we go through that, you've got a very strong staff. You're very educated on a month-to-month basis on your financial results. So really what I'm going to walk you through shouldn't be any surprise. Some of the graphs included, some of the ratios included are maybe more from my standpoint as an auditor, as a CPA, as a numbers person, that these are what I look for when I look at the operations of a public service entity, looking at some of the ratios, some of the analysis year to year. So not really a surprise on the results. I'll give you some of those high-level results, but maybe some different ratios that you haven't looked at before, kind of to give you my perspective. So the audit recap. Anytime we're doing an audit, we're following certain standards. Those really haven't changed. We're always obtaining reasonable assurance that your financial statements are fairly stated. Part of our audit procedures are verifying, obtaining evidence, talking a lot with management, as well as looking at estimates. And really one item I wanted to point out here that is a little unique for 2020, and we'll continue to monitor over the next couple of years, is the allowance for doubtful accounts. So you received a report a few items ago on the collectability of some of those outstanding receivables. During the planning of 2020, during the actual 2020, as we crossed over into 2021, started field work, but really we've been talking for months with management and staff. What's your feeling on these receivables, potential uncollectability, and ultimately, what's the potential impact on your financial statements? So spent a lot of time understanding all of that. When I get to the timeline, we were probably ready to go final about mid-April, but we decided to wait when that April 20th timeline hit and those shutoffs could begin and those conversations could be had. We wanted to make sure that management's understanding or estimating of those collectability potential issues, that we could kind of see how that happened. We saw some positive results, and then we were able to issue within the last week or so. So the timeline, Mark mentioned it already a little bit. We do spend a lot of time during the year staying in touch with management and staff, just gaining an understanding of how the year's going. I would say more important in 2020 with all the uniqueness surrounding that. As Mark mentioned, we were on site virtually early March and continued through April. As I mentioned, we could have probably finalized in mid-April, waited another 3 to 4 weeks to kind of see the impact of the April 20 shut-off begin, and then issued in May. It's a very, very similar timeline to previous years. Completing this in an entire remote environment, certainly challenging, but did not impact the timeline. So very, very big thank you to everyone involved in making that happen. Audit results. So when you obtain an audit, ultimately you want your audit firm's opinion on your financial statements, a clean, unmodified opinion in the 2020 audit. That's really what you've had in the past, what you want to receive every single year, hopefully what you receive going forward, a clean, unmodified opinion. When we go through the audit, we also have the potential to report any findings. We really are focused on two different areas, financial statements and legal compliance. Financial statements would be internal controls, mainly. We didn't have any findings related to the financial statement audit. We also are required by the state of Minnesota to do certain procedures over compliance or legal compliance. Also no findings in that audit. I'll pause there briefly. We're going to get into some numbers finally. Just see if you have any questions or comments on what I've talked about so far. All right, continue on. Cash, bond reserves, and investments. This is where we're going to see 10 years worth of information. And I was told early on in my career, you really can't identify a trend until you have a minimum of 3 data points. We want to make sure that you've got plenty of data points so you can see trends here. You can see in 2016, these total balances start to pick up. 2019 to 2020, pretty consistent. Operating cash, bond reserves, and investments all grew a little bit from 2019 to 2020, but for the most part, very consistent. We're going to focus on those operating cash balances, the blue in each one of those years as we go forward into the report, but overall very steady from 2019 to 2020, just over $35 million in total cash, reserves, and investments. Operating cash, we like to take a look at that. Operating cash is liquid. There's no restrictions, really what you can use on a day-to-day basis. Want to make sure that that's at an adequate level so you can continue without any really disruptions in operations. You can see a big jump from 2018 to 2019. That was very intentional. Anticipating an early 2020, an early payoff of some high interest debt. Essentially sold off some investments in the electric fund, converted those to cash right towards the end of 2019, so that could be on hand in 2020 to convert that into a debt payment. And then in 2020, a much more normal, kind of stable year from an operating cash standpoint, a slight increase, but overall about $13.4 million in operating cash combined in the two funds. Important to have cash in the reserves. When you see that straight dollar amount, it can be overwhelming. That's a lot of money, millions of dollars. I always like to analyze that in a way that makes a little bit more sense from an operations standpoint. It is important to have cash on hand for these various reasons. What does that look like for both electric and water? So what we did is we took the last 10 years and we converted that to days cash on hand. Essentially, how much cash do you have on hand in order to operate? And you could do that for how many days, essentially, without any revenue coming in. There's a lot going on this graph. The key would be those lines kind of right in the middle, the blue and green lines. About 3.5 years ago, there was a policy put in place to target 200 days on hand for electric. That's that blue line. And 225 days cash on hand in water. That's that green line. You can see you achieved both of those in 2020. If you look at this graph, in the last 10 years, really only been achieved in both funds 2 out of the last 10 years. So in 2020, achieved those targeted levels of days cash on hand. Operations. This is looking at revenues, expenses, kind of the impact of that being the operating income. This is focused on the electric fund. We'll get into the water fund in a few slides. Also presented then is I already mentioned the operating income. The very, very bottom line would be annual transfers out. So it's very important to understand in the electric fund, really needing to generate operating income for various reasons. One of the more important ones are those budgeted transfers out. We include those as well. In 2017, that top line, that blue line, the operating revenues in 2017 saw a rate increase. And then since then, no rate increases for the last 3 years. And really the last 3 years, it's been a slight decrease each year in kilowatt hours sold. So with no rate increases, some decreased selling of kilowatt hours, those operating revenues decreased slightly each of those 3 years. Operating expenses, which are generally very parallel with those operating revenues, did much of the same, slight decrease in 2019 to 2020. Operating income really has maintained very stable the last 4 years since that rate increase. Very, very consistent, just under 15 million in 2020. And then, of course, the transfers out, also very consistent, budgeted transfers to various city funds. From my standpoint, I always like to look at margins. What are the margins being generated from operations? Then, accounting for miscellaneous items as well as debt service, what are the net margins? So operating margins is really taking the data from that previous page. What are you generating in operating cash just related to operating the electric fund, excluding debt service? You really need to be generating positive margins so that you can pay your debt service obligations and also that you can add to the reserves. You can see for the last 4 years, very consistent operating margins, 34% in 2020. That's generally been between 31 and 32% the last 4 years. And then from a net margin perspective, after you take into account mainly debt service, but also miscellaneous items, also very consistent net margin the last 4 years, 13.6% in 2020. As a numbers person, I love to see consistency. That's really been the case in the electric fund the last 4 years. I'm going to pause there before we get into the water fund, just to see if there's any questions on electric fund operations.
Well, Brian, the one question I have, in 2015, you've got a negative 0.1% in net margins. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. 2015 was, there was about $2.3 million of what we targeted or called a special item, something that doesn't happen every year. That was the demolition of the old inactive Elm Street power station. Really a one-time, very unique item, extraordinary item that led to that negative net margin in 2015. And that would be the reason that it looks so odd. It is a very unique item.
Chair. Mr. Stavanger, for an electric utility, is there a set net margin range that we should be shooting for? Obviously, it changes year to year given certain circumstances, projects, those sorts of things. But in general, in our industry, is there something that a range that we should be looking for?
There's really not a decent benchmark out there. Everyone operates it so differently. Not every public utility has the budgeted transfers to the city that this public utility has, and that's okay. Not every utility, not every city, not every government is the same. The fact that you need to generate enough margins to be able to contribute those transfers on an annual basis likely leads to a higher margin than what you might see in similar type utilities that don't have that commitment. So it really is a wide range. I mean, I would say generally 15 to 20% is what I would see without that annual budgeted transfer. So you're just going to kind of add on to that specifically to your situation.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to the water fund. Water fund operating revenues and operating expenses, very similar here as well. The difference between the two, operating income and then annual transfers out. Those transfers out of the water fund, much less significant than the electric fund, but they certainly still exist. The water fund has been a little bit different than the electric fund the last few years, the last 4 years, and really you can see here since 2014, consistent increases. There's also been much more consistent annual rate increases. Specific to 2020, a rate increase plus additional cubic feet sold compared to 2019 led to an overall increase, just right around $10 million in operating revenues. In 2020, operating expenses, that green line actually decreased. Water main repairs, costs of water treatment, supply costs decreased in 2020. So actually, you had a combined rate increase, more water sold. The impact of that operating expense decrease led to an increase in your operating income, over $3 million in operating income in 2020. Good results in that water fund in 2020. We're taking a look at that from a margin standpoint. You can see the combination of a rate increase, additional cubic feet sold, and a decrease in operating expenses really had a positive impact on your operating margins. Operating margins jumped up in 2020 to 32%. Those have been much more consistently between 20 and 25% in the water fund. Not as much of an impact on your net margins. Those did increase compared to 2019. Still much more reasonable when you look at historical average net margins. So always important to understand both your operating margins and your net margins, how they work together, what's also in that net margin with debt service and other obligations. So an increase in those operating margins, but very consistent when you look at kind of the net bottom line net margins in the water fund. I'll pause there and just see if there's any questions on water fund operations.
Mr. Stavanger, I'm just curious. I noticed a dip in operational expenses in 2020. Is that COVID related? Is that deferred projects, or is that combination, or just good leadership and management, I suppose?
Mark, do you want to answer that question? You know the numbers better than I do. I would suspect some of that is, can you go back one slide, please? Guessing part of it, we've got some operating income. That the increase there, of course, is sales. So I think part of that COVID is part of the increase in sales. More people are at home. A lot of business was still going on, but it probably slowed down a little bit. Mark, I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, the only things that I really noticed as we were reviewing it is that our maintenance cost really dropped significantly, whether that's a result of the water main replacements that have been taking place over the last few years, coupled with the milder weather. It hasn't put as big a strain on the overall system. And water main breaks themselves are relatively expensive to fix. So by cutting down on those over the last few years, we really noticed the impact this year. So we're hoping that will continue for the next couple of years. And again, that'll have an impact on our budgeting and rate setting as we go forward. So it was definitely a positive year, just fewer maintenance costs. And as Brian mentioned, the cost of chemicals stayed relatively stable. And again, the team over there does a good job of monitoring what we're using and keeping our needs and our ratios where they need to be to comply with Department of Health regulations.
I think another side of that too is that the chemical costs did go down last year, and Mark was working on that a lot, trying to, with what was going on in the river, a lot of those costs were able to be brought down because of, he didn't have to do as much chlorination or need as much chemical from that. I know we'll be talking probably a little bit more about it in the annual management report in June. But yeah, I would suspect that that's a major piece of that. From a standpoint of water main breaks, it's volatile. Yeah, we had a good year this year, but next year could be a bad year. So it's hard to say it's what it could be, and it'd be nice to continue that route, but we'll have to see what time tells.
Thank you.
All right, one more, debt service coverage. So in a debt-intensive industry, there's a lot of significant investment in assets or infrastructure, generally taking on debt to finance that. We always want to make sure that that debt service coverage is important. It's partially in those margins. This is a different way to look at it. Combining both electric and water and looking at debt service coverage as a whole. From a general standpoint, 1.00 is really the bare minimum you want to have. If you have anything below that, that just means you're having to dip into reserves to be able to pay debt service. Anything above that means on an annual basis, you're generating enough margins to be able to pay your debt service kind of after everything else is accounted for. You don't really want to be near one, I'll tell you that. Really any entity, you want to be operating at a level that gives you a little bit of a cushion. I would say 1.25 is probably the minimum you want to be operating at. Anything above that is going to give you just more strength The ability to repay is not an issue. When you're going out and getting a bond rating, they're looking at this, a higher coverage ratio that you can have. Generally, the better rating they're going to give you. Now, I mentioned earlier on, I like to identify trends. I certainly wouldn't look at 2020 as, oh my gosh, what happened? There certainly were things that happened in 2020 that led to this decrease in debt service coverage. You remember when I was talking about cash in 2019? Cash increased significantly in the electric fund. That was in anticipation of paying off about a $7 million bond early, paying off a high interest rate bond. That impacted this debt service coverage ratio. So while the operations didn't necessarily cover your normal debt payments, plus that $7 million, you had cash dedicated to that $7 million. So this is a little, I don't want to say misleading, but the calculation itself doesn't allow you to add in $7 million of cash. So just assume we took that $7 million out, that ratio is actually much closer to 3, even closer to 4. But because of the calculation, I didn't want to monkey with it too much. Understand that in 2020, it was a pretty unique situation. There was some cash on hand used to pay off some debt early. So that dip in 2020 to 135, I'm not real concerned about it. It makes sense to me. Everything else that I've looked at, everything else that I've shared with you would suggest that there's really no issues here. This is a one-time taking advantage of some cash on hand to pay off some debt early. Would definitely expect that to go back up into the future.
Brian, question for you. The bonding that we did in 2020 for some water main projects and other capital projects for the water division, does that also impact the debt service coverage?
A little bit, because it does also take a look ahead into 2021. So I think some of those payments begin in 2021. I don't think they were real significant, but it does have a little bit of an impact on it, yep.
Thank you.
That is the conclusion of the executive summary. Really allowing for any other questions or comments.
I would just like to add to Mark's comment. Mark and his staff did a phenomenal job putting this together and working through it while going through all the payment plan agreement stuff and getting everything ready for that. So, kudos to all of them for doing this. They did a great job. I didn't have to touch too much, which is probably bad from an engineer's perspective.
Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
One last question, Mr. Savinger. I'm just wondering how the AFTA is maybe affecting the audit for us as far as the sizable amount of accounts due. And obviously, we saw that dip some in April, but is that going to affect our 2021 audit at all and or bond ratings if we can't get that down?
It could. It's something we're going to continue to be in touch with management about. As you heard, they're all over that. Could it have an impact? It could. It could have a financial impact. I don't see it as a significant impact based on what's happened so far, but there still is, those agreements, those essential 2-year deferral payment plans. There's still some risk out there that those aren't collected. It's good that they're signed. Mark mentioned a few items before I got started that, they're signed, but they still haven't started collecting on those. So there is still some risk that there could be an impact on 2021 and beyond. Definitely something that we're going to continue to monitor and we'll report back at the conclusion of next year's audit.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
The slides were really, I thought the graphics were really excellent. They helped explain things to a person that doesn't really get finance as much as one ought to. So, thank you. I'm ready to entertain a motion to approve the report.
Moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. And was that, Sebastian, was that you?
Yes.
Okay. I have a motion by McDougal, seconded by Duran, to approve the 2020 audited financial statements. Discussion? Seeing none. Paulson?
Aye.
Duran?
Yes.
McDougal?
Yes.
Thompson, yes. Item number 13, approve authority to take rate dispute to Department of Commerce. Mr. Schmidt.
Yep, I'll start with this, yeah. So back in 2016, the Minnesota legislature approved a railroad crossing law, basically that helped out utilities and city governments with crossing railroads and reducing overall long-term costs for that. Part of that, we've got many legacy type crossing agreements, and there's not a lot within that you want to call it rule or statute that really kind of explains the details of those legacy crossings and the cost tied to that. There's some information. They do a really good job with the details of going forward and current stuff, but not a lot tied to the legacy crossing. So we've had some conversations back and forth with BNSF's legal, and I'll let John Bolger continue from there on his approach on how we want to go forward with a rate dispute with either the Minnesota Department of Commerce or the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission.
Good evening. What Travis described is correct. The statute is very clear on what happens with crossings that are put in after 2016, but not nearly as clear on what happens to crossings that were in existence before that. We've got two permits with BNSF, one from 1974 and one from 1978. And there's a law firm representing BNSF that has made demand on us for payment of about $17,000 on these two particular permits that are up. We offered to pay what would be the amount due under the statute, and I haven't received a response to that offer yet. It was made about 3 weeks ago. If they come back and say we're going to take action to collect that, I would like to have the ability to go before either the Minnesota Department of Commerce or the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission and request that they make a determination on whether we are covered by that 2016 statute and don't have to pay what BNSF is seeking from us. It may be that BNSF doesn't want to be in front of a court or either the Public Service Commission or the Department of Commerce on this. They may not threaten to go any farther, but if they do, I just wanted to be ready to bring it before either the Department of Commerce or the Public Utilities Commission for determination.
Questions? Mr. McDougal.
I was just gonna say, what is the difference between what we offered to pay and what they're asking to pay?
Well, what we offer to pay in round numbers is about $1,800 for each, and what they're, in round numbers, what they're asking for is about $8,500 in each. But the problem is that by their logic, they would be asking for something every year from us, and that would be fairly intolerable for us, given what the legislature has said would be a fair price to pay.
Moving forward, it's a one-time fee payment that you'd have to pay when you're outside of right-of-way. If you're crossing within a right-of-way, there's no cost. And so these legacy agreements are kind of out there, and there's really no good information on how to proceed with them. I mean, you can always go out and, terminate the existing one and start a new one, but again, there's a lot of time and legal costs tied to that. Is there an easier way to do that? And this is kind of why we're looking to go towards the rate dispute.
If we terminated and then wanted to start over, we'd have to reapply with the railroad. They could technically say, pull your water lines out, pull your wires out, and then even if you do get a new permit, they know that we will have spent so much money pulling out and putting it back in that it wouldn't be feasible for us if there's a way to get this resolved short of that.
The stance that we've taken in the past is that we've paid over the, the amount of a $1,800 crossing fee. We're no longer required to pay anymore, and that's the stance that we have taken based on information and what we were reading and working with MMUA, who was one of the utility associations that was working with the state legislature to put this statute in place. So, they were providing us information on how this was working. Kind of going off of that and reading through the statute, we were comfortable with the approach we had taken. Unfortunately, Maslon is pushing back on that, so we need to be able to get some approval to move forward.
Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So do the legacy agreements specify an annualized payment for the permit, or is that an interpretation by the BNSF attorneys?
I believe that the 1974 and 1978 contracts have an amount in them. I can find that answer in a moment.
There's some type of annual payment. What that is, John, I don't know if there's an escalator on it or not, but John kind of looked through that.
Have we paid those each year?
We did up until 2016, and that's kind of where the
Okay.
$17,000 is coming from, is that we've basically said, we've paid over the maximum of what a new permit is. We're now no longer going to be paying these, and we've got the proof to show how much we've actually paid on an annual basis. So what the state legislature did back in 2016 was for the benefit of city governments and utilities, so that they didn't have to continue to pay these exorbitant amounts of costs.
So basically, we can get the Department of Commerce or the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission to make a determination on how these agreements fall in line with state legislation. Is there any concern with any federal legislation that would fall with BNS being able to continue to deal with this? I mean, it seems like kind of a quagmire of legal agreements and legislation and laws, but
I'm not aware of any federal law that would apply because it really doesn't affect their ability to participate in interstate commerce. We tunnel under a line. It isn't affecting their ability to run in either direction with whatever they might be hauling. And in answer to your previous question, one of the contracts is for $190 a year, and the other one is for $385 a year. But it's every year.
every year, yeah.
There might be an escalator in there too, because that seems low for the 17,000.
Sure.
So what's the worst case scenario other than, what is the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario would be if we lose, we'll end up paying what they're requesting
Okay.
year after year.
There are carve-outs within the statute. If it's longitudinal and we're in the railroad right-of-way and it's longer than a mile, those we have to pay on an annual basis. And those are explained really well within the statute as well. And some of these that are just a perpendicular crossing is different.
Okay.
Madam Chair, one more question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Paulson.
So I'm surprised that 2016 legislation didn't contemplate prior agreements. Was it oversight, or, and then, with that thought, there's got to be some case law in Minnesota that's already addressed this issue, I would think.
I suspect that railroad lobbyists slipped in or crossed out a sentence at the last minute and it got passed with that because it doesn't make any sense that it would read in the manner the railroad is interpreting it through their legal counsel today. But I can see where it's a possible interpretation, but I don't think it's the correct one. And there's only one case, and it's really not directly on point. And it was with the railroad, and it was a parallel crossing, and the railroad ended up being on the losing side of it, and it was BNSF. But it isn't directly on point with the issue we're dealing with, so I can't say, oh, I know we'll win based on the way that case. And I've not been able to find any other case than this one, which was decided in 2018. There's been no cases since then.
Thank you, Mr. Bolger, and I'm all in favor of giving you your sling to take down Goliath here. So, so I'll make a motion, Madam Chair, to give the authority to take this to Department of Commerce or the Public Utilities Commission.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Paulson, seconded by Duran to take the rate dispute to where it needs to go. And any discussion, further discussion? Seeing none. Duran? A or nay?
Yes.
McDougal?
Yes.
Paulson?
Yes.
Thompson? Yes. And you have your marching orders, Mr. Bolger.
Thank you. I said this before, but I do want to point out that I don't think I will bring it forward if we get a successful resolution in the response from the railroad. I want to see what they come back with this time
Okay.
before I do that.
All right, thank you. Item number 14, closed meeting for executive session. We are not going into closed session today. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved?
Second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by McDougal, seconded by Paulson to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, meeting is adjourned.